Good morning, Amy.
Hey, Courtney.
Hi, Katie.
Hello.
We're just going to wait a little while to see if we can get quorum. Welcome, everybody. And Laura, I got your message. Thank you. And I think that's a great idea. After we do roll, we can have you and Lily introduce yourselves. Just want to give it one more minute to see if anyone else joins. Okay, well, maybe we can just get started and hopefully other folks will join. So right now we are technically without a committee chair, and that's sort of the number one thing on our agenda today. I'm going to share the agenda, and I thought I could just walk us through these items. We're going to be voting on the committee chair and then discussing the organizational assessment that was presented at our last full Forest Health Council meeting, or the one in January, rather. Okay, so I'm going to run through the roll. Vaughn Jones, Amy Moyer.
Here.
Hi, Amy. John Ring is excused. Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally.
Present.
Morning, Jody. Selden White Skunk. Brett Wolk. Katie McGrath Novak.
Here.
Morning, Katie. And Commissioner Clyde Church. Good morning, Commissioner. So because Allison Lurch and Christina Bury have had to step down from their positions on the committee, we actually do have quorum. We have a rather small committee now, but I think we might be able to recruit some more members at the next meeting. Also, since we've had a few people move off. So yeah, this might be a good time. Maybe Laura and Lily, you can introduce yourselves to the other committee members or to the committee members.
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. Apologies for any of the background noise if that's going because we're working from a cafe today. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Hickey. I work with CDR Associates, and we are supporting Katie, Courtney, Brett, and Diana with development of the Colorado Forest Resilience Planning Guide. Lily is with ERO Resources, comes from technical background, and CDR is a mediation and facilitation firm really focused on land management, water resources, and transportation projects throughout Colorado. So this falls in our land management and water resources realm. If you have any questions, I can answer those now. Thanks for letting me sit in. We're just listening in to, keep in touch with what this committee has going on and sees for the and envisions for the guide. And I think Lily and I will be sitting in on these for the next few months as we develop the guide. Lily, did you want to say hi?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Lily, and as Laura said, I'm with ERO Resources. We're an environmental consulting firm, so I'll be sitting in with Laura today as we prepare to draft the guide. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily and Laura. It's great to have you all join us and to be really taking the reins on the Forest Resilience Guide. Looking forward to meeting with you later this week. The next thing on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. We haven't, I think at the last meeting we didn't have quorum, so there's sort of a backlog of meeting minutes. Hopefully you all were able to read them, and if not, we can also put them, at least some of them, off another month because I know there was a lot to read. We have the January, February, and March meeting minutes to approve. So can I have either a motion to approve all or some of those meeting minutes? Or any changes, if there were any changes you wanted to see?
Also move.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great, thank you all. So the meeting minutes are approved. And I will also note that Brett Wolk has joined the meeting. Welcome, Brett. We just approved the meeting minutes and we're moving on to agenda item number 3, which is selecting a new committee chair. So I think how this process worked in the past was that a member will need to be nominated, either self-nominated or nominated by another committee member, and then we can take a vote as a committee, and we have quorum, so we'll just need a positive committee vote to select a new chair. So does anyone want to make a nomination, or does anyone have questions? I know you guys have all been really active, so I imagine you know what it takes to be the committee chair. I'm happy to support as much as you need. I do make the calendar invites, and then we can work together on solidifying an agenda, and I can do a lot of the communication if you prefer, or if someone prefers to do the communication themselves, that works as well.
I guess I'll nominate Katie. I think she'd be a great leader of the committee and has really stepped in and also has been participating in this one as well as leveraging resources, so can make some of those connections.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate that.
And I'd be excited to continue to do a lot of work on the committee, and you're not doing it alone.
Well, I would hope not.
Great. So it sounds like Katie is accepting the nomination. Is anyone else wanting to make a nomination or has any other questions about being the committee chair? Okay, great. It's looking like no, or I'll give one more second.
A quick question, and I also would support Katie if you're up for being the committee chair. I think you'd be great. And I tried to convince Katie to do it once before, so I'm glad that maybe we've moved the needle. So thank you, Brett. The only question I had, Courtney, was how the committees may shake up if there's the big wave of a lot of us going off in November. And I didn't know if we could talk about that. Katie, I think you didn't maybe joined a little bit later than some of us. So it could also be great for some continuity if that's the case. But that was my only question, Courtney. I don't know if it's something we want to tackle right now or if there's any clarification as to how the committees will progress if it is the case that we lose quite a bit of the membership.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have a clear answer for you. That's something that we're certainly talking about at DNR. My initial impression was that reappointments would not be possible, but I'm now hearing that if people are interested in a second term on the council, that might be an option. And so if that's the case, I imagine that there could naturally be some continuity in the committees. Actually, I would love to take a very informal poll just to understand how council members are feeling. I won't even, don't need to put it in the notes even, but are you all interested in a second term on the council? Okay, yes.
I am.
Okay, great. I mean, you guys are all so passionate that I imagine, yes.
A question.
In
of-
our last meeting, oh, sorry, go ahead, Clyde.
No. What was the term? I forgot. How long is the term limit? 1 year, 2 year, 3 years?
So the term is 3 years. And one thing that we've recently learned is that people who left the council or the members that have filled a council seat that was vacated partway through a term, they're actually only on the council until the end of that original appointments term. So according to the bylaws, Katie, you and I believe you, Commissioner Church, would be timing out this fall along with all of the other council members because your appointment was technically only through the end of the person who you replaced. So that's how it's written in the bylaws right now. And it sounds like there's more conversations about reappointment, and especially if you haven't even been on the council for 3 years, I think there would certainly be good reason to believe you would be reappointed. So this is something that's still being talked about internally. We're having communications with the governor's office about how the governor appointed positions will work.
Yeah, a list of those term limiting off would be useful.
So that's everyone who doesn't work for a state or federal agency. So it'll only be the U.S. Forest Service and state Forest Service. And by state Forest Service, I even mean like Director McCombs. But not some of the other, I know there's some other state Forest Service staff who represent specific positions. So I think everyone on this call would be expiring in the fall.
Well, it's State Forest Service. Ethan Buchholz is the only one who holds an official position as a academic representative with ecological forest ecology knowledge or something like that. But Aaron Green and other State Forest Service people are here as support staff working with Director McCombs. So I think they would still be here. And just to clarify, CFRI is not considered a state agency in the same sense. My seat is on the 3-year term. So I'd be up for this, whatever decision is made of being able to apply or not.
So I'll try to have more clarity on that maybe in the next couple of weeks, and I can send an email out to both let people know what to expect and also gauge interest in reappointments.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Sorry to derail us just a bit. There's no way to get around the continuity issue at this point. So I think I'm happy to move to a vote to confirm Katie as the chair of this committee.
Great.
Second it.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, the motion passes unanimously. And Katie is the new chair of the Leveraging Resources Committee.
Yay, thanks everyone.
You'll have to be a little patient with me. I'm also trying to take notes at the same time. So it'll be great when when I'm back to one role. Okay, great. So Katie, I will work with you after. I'll schedule a little call with you after this, and we can talk through how we want to work together to help support the
That sounds
committee and
good.
how I can support you. So the next item on the agenda was the discussion of the organizational analysis of state-supported wildfire mitigation efforts in Colorado. This was the organizational assessment that was mandated by Senate Bill 21258. Allison presented the results of this study at the January Forest Health Council meeting. I also sent out the full report and the summary last week. And I'm happy to share my screen right now with some high level summary so that you guys have something to talk about. But we had originally been thinking this would be a good time for the committee to just reflect on the report, what they thought, and then also to have a conversation around how the committee's work with the forest tracker and the forest resiliency guide can align with the recommendations that are being outlined in the report. So let me share my screen so that you all can see some of these high-level recommendations. And maybe even before we get into the recommendations, does anyone have any thoughts about the report itself? Was anything surprising or feel particularly important? I don't know if any of you all were consulted in the development of the report, but I know a lot of these issues or concerns or thoughts or things that many different entities across the state were expressing, even if they didn't have the chance to give specific feedback into the development of the report.
I don't have a ton of feedback on like the main portion of the report, but I do have thoughts on some of the recommendations that seem super relevant to the work of like this committee specifically, but also the full Forest Health Council.
Great. Well, maybe we can just go ahead and get into that. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, I'm trying to find where it went. The
Happy to
third,
hop to other screens too, if that would be helpful. If you just direct me, I can move through the report.
no, that's okay. I found it. Under short term, the third bullet, explore how collaboration during project planning can deliver more successful mitigation treatments. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, and then in the full report, it has like a subtext that says DNR, State Forest Service, and DFPC should work together to consider how implementation teams are and can be engaged earlier in the project life cycle. Yeah. I feel like that aligns pretty well with the Forest Resilience Planning Guide. And so I don't know if there's a way that we can integrate more of those three agencies into the Forest Resilience Planning Guide to kind of make sure that we're helping push these recommendations forward as well as our own. I'm not sure what the implementation teams were. I might have missed that.
So I had a question about, also, Katie brought this up, the communicate agency skills and capabilities to internal teams, external partners. Who, I'm always curious who are those external partners. So, and if it's also external partners of the federal government as well. In our space, that Black Diamond report, for a while, we got a chance to put input, but Larimer County really wasn't at the table, along with some of these NGOs that were doing a lot of this planning. And so we felt the mitigation work in discussion of ingress, egress routes, and evacuation, and some of those other important conversations were missing because they weren't in those key people who in the middle of the emergency would be the people who were doing it weren't at the table. So I feel like, just wondering about how that means if this is staying high at a state level, or is this drilling down into a local government level, and what that looks like, what that means. And because I feel like there's a lot of mitigation work happening that's being funded at a local level that is right along some of these borders, and not all of it's being done together, but maybe the communication between projects needs to happen, if that makes sense. I don't know, am I making sense? Because I don't know what it means by external partners.
In my impression is, external partners is a wide and open to interpretation. So when I think about the Forest Resilience Guide, the audience for that guide, we said might be people working sort of at a county scale, whether it's municipalities or counties or collaborative groups. And I imagine those would all be external partners. So I also thought this would also be a good recommendation that could tie into the work that the committee is doing through that planning guide.
And then I do like the point of suppression and mitigation activities are not, mutually. I really like that piece because we have that tension or push and pull between some of those groups that only, are their main focus is suppression, but they still do some mitigation because of that suppression. And then they have ones that are doing the recovery, resiliency, and mitigation, looking at the mitigation work for, building up for the next one. And I think they have different percentages of their focus. And I think promoting that healthy collaboration and not competition, because I think there is some of that still in other areas of the state. And I think there is a little bit of that, I would say, just tension. And I think trying to, I think just putting that in there and promoting that, I like that piece. I do find that's something I was surprised, or maybe not surprised, to see that's existing, if that makes sense. So, because they're usually not, there's usually even within the same organization, different groups. That makes sense.
Yes, that does make sense. I wonder what we want to do in this meeting to, I'm highlighting things that you're saying seem relevant, but I'm wondering also if we want to somehow pull out pieces that we want to think about including in the Forest Resilience Guide, so that it's something that the smaller work group can take to the meeting later this week. I can also just take everything that we've discussed, and those can be things that we pull out and talk about, or things that might be related to the forest tracker. It would be good to, highlight those and keep them in mind as we continue to support CFRI and the State Forest Service's development of that tracker, and also the way the council recommends its implementation and use.
So that's a great example, because we're working on that GSI tracker here for the county, and the forest health tracker is getting developed, and that started from a conversation from our suppression focused group that wanted to have this GIS of where mitigation has happened throughout county, because they don't know all who's working on projects. A lot of these are NGOs or other organizations that are associated with the suppression group. And they really wanted to know, especially with critical infrastructure, not all of it's public facing, but they wanted to know where things are happening or are planning to happen or have been completed and how much and what was the prescription, so that in the event of when, and I emphasize when, the next wildfire happens, they know where it maybe to push the fire or where there has been mitigation work to help slow things down. And that was instrumental in the Cameron Peak fire to slow it down when it came through the Shambhala Center. And so I think that's a really important, for me, kind of a relationship to bring those groups together. And I kind of think of that subcommittee between the Fire Commission and the Forest Health Council that we have, kind of the conversation, because suppression doesn't really feel like it's part of the Forest Health Council post-fire playbook, but I think really promoting those relationships, and we're hoping that our GIS tracker that we're going to have, that'll have all those layers, whether it's who's doing mitigation work and planning, and what has been done, and then also critical infrastructure, critical wildlife habitats, or all these different layers that we can stack on top of each other in the event of emergency, that our suppression groups and our emergency services group, which is different than our Office of Emergency Management, all have kind of this interesting data all put into one spot, so that, because that's all that together is extremely useful information and powerful, instead of having to try to get everyone in the middle of a emergency to bring all the data together. So we're hoping to be way upstream and have that already kind of combined. And so I kind of see it as that interconnected relationship. So just something I'm thinking as well. And we're trying to get that done short term for this season a little bit, and what we're going to do long term with this, our own kind of GIS modeling.
Yeah, I was just looking at these points, and what I'm seeing is things that are universally pervasive through the organization, from the smallest collaborative. There's always a discussion of suppression versus mitigation, and the end goals and final how things are going to look. We see this really in CFLRP collaboratives as a strong common bond between collaboratives, I think counties, the state, and we're all at different places right now, but these are things that I think are common and are true. So
Yeah, I agree. These are sort of universal issues that people are facing at all scales. I'm thinking, Jody, about what you said, the suppression and mitigation activities in this map that is used by both people who are planning mitigation projects, but also people who are doing suppression. And Brett, I'm curious for the forest tracker, I know your hands are completely full gathering the data, building the tool. Is there any sort of conversation about how it's dispersed or how it's shared with people who might be doing mitigation or people who are engaging in suppression? And is that some sort of role that maybe this committee could support with, which is like in terms of leveraging this resource? Part of leveraging, I think, is getting the tools out to people. So is that something that's already been discussed? Or is there an idea of whose role that is?
We have definitely discussed that. We do not have like a communication and outreach plan all set for like how to exactly execute that. But I know the fire suppression community at like the Forest Service regional office level, Division of Fire Prevention and Control, even local fire protection districts that I talk with around the state. They're all really eager to have that to use with their other decision-making tools. So for example, there's a person at the Forest Service Regional Office who is the fire analyst, that when a fire happens, they're the one person that gets called to like send whatever data to the the incident management teams or whoever comes in. And they've already said, like, as soon as you have that, that's part of what I'm sending. Every fire that happens, that's what they're getting, right? So it's already out there. Yes, the fire suppression community is wanting to use it. And yes, there's more work to do on developing a strategic sort of outreach plan to make sure it's in the right people's hands to be used.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe when that moment comes, you could also do a little brainstorming session in the committee so we can, also make a list and I can help organize that when the time comes to share it, to make sure it's leveraged to its full extent.
Yep. Yeah, we definitely have always planned to use this committee and the full Forest Health Council as a somewhere between like a sounding board and a advisory committee, but pretty engaged in the tracker, right? And helping disseminate it.
There's a recommendation under long-term that I think also really aligns with the forest tracker potentially, to collectively define and track strategic performance measures across statewide efforts. I don't know how much the forest tracker is doing with like creative new performance measures, but this seems like, other than that, it seems very much like the tracker's kind of purpose.
Yes, and we've looked at the California treatment dashboard that they have, right? And it has that dashboard where it pulls up immediate metrics of that. It's a lot of acres treated by different agencies and land ownership types and things like that. But yeah, we're hoping to go a little bit beyond that and have talked about some initial ideas. But yes, I think the tracker will help with some of this.
Courtney, do you know if during the writing of this report, they were aware of the tracker and like thinking of it when they wrote this recommendation?
Unfortunately, I was not too closely tied with the development of this report. I believe, at least in the information gathering phase, the forest tracker had not yet been very publicly discussed. And so I'm not sure if any internal stakeholders were talking about it to the consultants or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think it was, Katie. And I think this might go to what the governor calls WIGs, wildly important goals. That I know the State Forest Service, the FPC, like DNR as a whole, has to report on. So I imagine they were thinking about building on things like that, which again, right now is very, I think, and maybe someone else can speak up if they know more, but my understanding is it's mostly acres treated. Is what's being reported as the main WIGs for forestry. And then there's other metrics of number of fires suppressed and, fires started, fires suppressed, acreage burned, some of those basic statistics, right? But that's where this report is asking to, I think, go above and beyond that, right? What are the actual outcome measures of so many fires that happened? Were they good? Were they bad? Some of both? How do we know?
I think if we get our little GIS thing done, we're also, I think the emergency services are tracking the little tiny fires that were done. Because like in 2022, we had, I don't think it was last year, 2022, we had 52 fires under 300 acres that were 100% contained.
Mhm.
And that was a budget thing, but that is important, I think, also to have on the tracker or on our tracker. But also was curious, all these different agencies have different prescriptions or treatment prescriptions. So I think we're going to try to put that on ours as well. And I don't know if we're looking at that because there are some varying ideas of the amount. And we certainly have a little bit of a range here in Lamar County. And I don't know if you're seeing that all, or is there kind of a best practice percentage across the whole state? Everyone's following, but as I understand, there might be a range. And I'm just curious about that as well, or if it varies between elevations in different areas and things. So I'm just thinking out loud about what else would be interesting to have that information all in one spot.
Mhm. I'm sorry, Jody, you were asking about different forest management activity types? And how
Yeah,
across the state?
yeah, because, some of these nonprofits and organizations have different, philosophies, treatment,
Mhm.
prescriptions. And I'm just curious about that, what that looks like, if there's a certain percentage or best practice that everyone's following. But, I think it depends on, what works down in Archuleta County does not look the same as maybe what's happening in Larimer County or up in Summit County. They're different forests, different regions, different climate conditions, or even elevation. So I'm just curious about some of that. What I'm saying, what that looks like, and if that impacts kind of overall what we're seeing as we strategize, if that changes risk over priority areas because of that, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? And just something I've been thinking about. I've been all the other meetings today I've been in, I just got off of opiate abatement, and we're tracking, that data and that percentages and how that looks in all the county. And so I'm just thinking about some of those other maps, and we're all talking pretty much the same thing. We want to see what's happening and where it's happening, what's happening, and who's doing it. So it's kind of similar conversation, but just different subject matter. So talking a lot of data today.
Yeah. I'm curious what Aaron has to say, but yeah, I would say there's some big buckets of categories of, are you using fire as your tool or machines? And then how are you implementing those different machine tools? And that varies a lot from forest to forest and region to region, but
lots of different science on what an effective treatment is, and it's really hard to define. There's a general technical report, 373, that really identifies a high density, medium density, and low density, and that's just for ponderosa pine and dry mixed conifer. When you start getting into lodgepole pine or spruce fir or pinyon juniper, all your treatments will be different and are really site specific. Even in ponderosa pine, for example, a really heavy treatment in ponderosa pine in Castle Rock might release a ton of oak from the understory that will turn it into a ladder fuel with needle drape and can be a really big issue. In somewhere like there, we also experience a lot of that in the Durango area, that sometimes you do a thinning and you get an oak explosion afterwards, and depending on how much material you leave, that can be maybe counterproductive to your strategy for fire suppression. So I would also say that different landowners have different objectives. The landowner objective of the Forest Service might be different than each individual property owner on what they want to see. And so each prescription is kind of nuanced and unique to the location, the site-specific information, and the landowner. But getting at what I think this is trying to get at are something more than just acres of accomplishment, and understanding what treatment was done is often a challenge that may be something that long-term could be overcome. But I see this maybe as what percentage of a watershed has been treated, because there's a lot of evidence that suggests once you treat 30 to 40% of a watershed, you're starting to have an overall effectiveness in decreasing the potential impacts of fire in that area. This might do something to track how much we are getting done in an individual watershed, or maybe even an estimate of treatment effectiveness in a time frame, because some treatments are going to be effective for 40, 50 years, and some treatments might only be effective for 20 years, depending on how many trees that you remove from allowing canopies to encroach. So it's really difficult and nuanced, and it's different everywhere, which is not a great answer to say that it's complicated, but that's kind of the situation.
I think it was a great answer, and but I think there were some great points there. And it is complicated, but I would almost just be curious, even just listing the treatment, whether it's some kind of, other than just acres treated, just some kind of measure, and the species that were treated or not, what's there. I just think it's interesting there's a lot of information we could use in the long term if some of this is collected now, instead of we get to that point in 10 years and saying, oh, Colleen, I wish we had kind of collected this back then. I'm just curious. I know it's a lot of work and a lot of data, but with changing conditions and things are happening, it might just be, I don't know, just thoughtfulness about what we're gathering, and keeping what's useful, but also what we might want to see in 20 years or not. I'm just thinking about that a lot lately in a lot of different arenas. But Aaron, I think actually that was a really good answer. I appreciate it.
Yeah, one observation is that each agency collects different information. I mean, if you're trying to compare acres treated, the Forest Service may have one definition, Colorado State might have another, BLM a different definition. And so we have those definitions and another level of complexity in collecting that data. We're doing that here, doing a mapping, graphical analysis on that, so that we can go back and see what agency is treating where and when. Because we're starting in some of our areas, we're starting back into the maintenance mode, going back, and it's been 10, 12 years, and Gambrel Oak comes back pretty fast. And now we've got 5, 6, 7 foot Gambrel Oak in some places, and they've got to treat it again. So it doesn't stop growing.
And it is my impression of the forest tracker that treatment data is collected, not just that acres were treated, but information on what treatment was applied is collected. So that sort of more detailed information that you're talking about is being recorded and tracked as well.
Yep. Some kind of mention of what the activity was and the date that it was finished are two of the minimum qualifications. We're not putting just a lot of blank polygons in there that don't have that information.
Do you collect for the forest tracker what the goal was? Because one thing that stood out about what Aaron was talking about is that like a treatment might not even have anything to do with wildfire. It could just be to make better hunting habitat for a landowner or something. And so I would hate to see treatments like that included in something that DFPC looks at to determine if it was effective for wildfire, if wildfire was not even a part of the goal. Although I imagine it is a goal for most projects.
Certainly, and like Aaron said, there's lots of different goals for different forest management activities. How that's tracked is not consistent at all, even within a single agency, let alone between agencies. So if there are notes about the objective of the activity, then we're sort of including that, but it's not like there's going to be firm drop-down menus of was it a mechanical activity or application of fire activity, or was it reforestation? And then was it fire, was it a broadcast burn, or was it pile burning? Right, so you'll be able to get that level of detail. Why you did a broadcast burn, was it for wildlife habitat or was it for fuels mitigation? That's going to be sort of in a longer, if any information was recorded, is just like appended as a notes thing, but it will be really hard to search and filter through that.
Interesting.
Because it's just not, I think that's one of my goals. And I think what I've heard from the council and other people is helping foresters set more clear goals and objectives and actually articulating those and writing them down is something that I hope the Forest Tracker and the Forest Resilience Planning Guide both really help with, is giving me tools and making it easier to do that, because that either it's not there or it's a cut and paste of we're going to save all of the things in all of the forests with this,
Right.
which is not helpful. Yeah.
Brett, I had a question along those lines of whether, just thinking of this committee and leveraging resources, of whether we could lend some support to future iterations of the Forest Tracker to be able to speak to some of the intent behind these projects, so that, you know, if we're trying to go after big chunks of funding, we could more easily demonstrate kind of the landscape level approach that Colorado has been taking on either of these fronts. So if we're going after large scale funding for watershed restoration, we could demonstrate where there is current or past efforts to do some of this work at scale, or you know, on down the line, depending on federal funding or state funding goals and objectives. And as those change with different leadership and priorities, I just think that could be useful on many fronts. So I don't know if that's something we could lend some support to for the future, knowing that, you know, you've got to start somewhere and you can't take on everything with the resources you have.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, like I said, that anything that helps people articulate goals and objectives either beforehand or also after, but ideally beforehand, I'm all for. I think there's some other ways to get about that. And Courtney, I'm thinking of actually some of the work that we're doing with Courtney and Allison Lurch on the COSWAP monitoring. I'm thinking about, there's lots of risk maps at that state level of where is the highest, right? We have wildfire rated watersheds that identifies watershed risk really well. We have the State Forest Action Plan and the recently updated CORA risk assessments that do, you know, WUI, you know, buildings and other things. And so you can overlay those risk areas at a statewide level with where the management has happened. And it's really clear, really quick. Oh, these projects are nowhere near the WUI zone, but they're right in the heart of this bright red watershed zone. Those are probably what, right? And so you can start to see some of that with some of the tools we have without going back to every forester for all the, you know, years prior and, you know, pulling goals and objectives out of them for all these projects that happened in the past.
That's helpful, Brett. So it sounds like you can overlay different maps of a risk map with ideally the Forest Tracker.
That doesn't tell you what that specific forest management objective was on that specific piece of ground, right? Where the activity happened. Because, you know, different agencies and landowners have different objectives, and they might, even though it's in a WUI zone, they might have done it really for wildlife habitat and not done a very good job of protecting the home, or vice versa. So there's lots of assumptions, but yeah, trying to think of ways to articulate that at a statewide level where you can at least say, here's a wildlife priority area, and we've done X amount of acres of management in these areas, right? Starts to get at that.
Got it. Thanks, Brett.
I'm thinking what would be helpful is if I pull out these things that we've highlighted and sort of summarize some of our conversations about how these recommendations relate specifically to these two tools that the committee is connected to. Are there any other recommendations or findings that you all want to flag or highlight as we're getting close to the end of the meeting?
One other thing that stuck out is the long-term recommendation to develop a strategic plan across the agencies. And I guess like in the medium term, it also has the statewide strategic approach to shared stewardship, basically, all of the interagency things that it recommends, which is the whole purpose of the report, brings me back to the other thing that the Forest Health Council is working on, which is the 30-year vision. And how like in our other, I think it was the full council meeting when we were talking about like, should the 30-year vision live within the forest action plan or should it be broader than that? And I think a lot of people thought it should be broader than that so that it doesn't get lost in the forest action plan. And I think this is a good example of like, how can we as the Forest Health Council create something that maybe would go into a cross-agency joint strategic plan or visioning process or something, just some way for us to have some weight potentially. I don't know if I even said anything there, but the idea of merging those two concepts is what I'm talking about.
I like that, Katie. I'm just going to throw one more out there, rapid fire, so you can get it in the notes, Courtney. There's somewhere in the report about increasing transparency of the agencies. And I think the forest tracker in particular will be a big tool to help, one of many tools, but right. I think a hope of having this discussion today was also to help the state agencies point to some things that you're doing or that are in motion to help start checking off some of the goals articulated in there. So, right, if one goal is to increase transparency, yes, we're moving towards that by making everything transparent on the forest tracker. Right, and the more that we can connect the work of this committee to those goals, that also then is a positive feedback loop of people think, oh, then the work of the committee is actually relevant and important, and we're not just sort of doing stuff that are pet projects for different reasons for different people, right? But it's tiered to these larger state goals.
Yeah, and I guess one more rapid fire is just a reminder. We may have talked about this already, but tying the forest tracker into the forest resilience planning guide, however that may be appropriate.
Yeah, it's really positive to see that so many of the recommendations and findings are already connected to the work that this committee is doing, and that the work the committee is doing is supporting these. So that'll be something nice to be able to report on in the annual report of the council, to show how these are not only priorities of the councils, but priorities of the agencies also, and pulled out in this organizational assessment. I'm not sure I'll be able to have all these pulled out by the time the group meets on, I believe, Wednesday, but I know there's a lot of members from that smaller working group here. So hopefully we will just have these in mind, and then it might take me at least a week to get these notes all sorted. Is there anything else people want to add or flag?
Just going to say thanks and introduce, we talked about why Aaron Green is here, like the State Forest Service, but and I'm not sure if other people on their call know Lily Perot and Laura Hickey. Sorry, Lily, if I didn't say your last name right. So maybe just introduce yourselves real quick in our last minute, unless you had something else, Courtney, and why you're here. If you're still listening, and it's okay if you're not, I'll just introduce you.
Brett, we did an introduction. They did introduce themselves at the beginning of the meeting. But great idea.
Great minds think alike.
Thanks for looking out for us, Brett.
Okay, great. Well then, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I second the chairwoman's motion.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. Anyone opposed? Okay, wonderful. Well, the meeting is adjourned. And yeah, Katie, I'll be talking to you about getting that next meeting set up and rolling. Thanks, everyone.
Aye.